Before the Imperium, before the legions, before the great endeavor to unite mankind, there was only one. A being whose existence predates all empires, and whose purpose was shaped long before history itself could be recorded. He has been called many names: Master of Mankind, the Omnissiah, the Emperor, but his true origins stretch into the primal depths of human myth, a legend written in the blood and dreams of forgotten ages. The Emperor did not rise from mortal birth as others did. He was not shaped by chance nor by the folly of genetic tampering. His genesis was older than any civilization, older than terror itself as a seat of power. To understand him, one must look back not at the dawn of the Imperium, but at the dawn of mankind itself, when humanity was young, scattered, and fearful of the dark. It was an age before records, when shamans and seers spoke in hushed tones of forces beyond understanding. The warp, that roiling tide of thought and emotion given form, was not yet the domain of ravenous entities, nor had the great perversions of chaos found their grip upon the stars. Instead, it was a force of nature, a vast ocean yet untainted, where the dreams of mortals could take shape. And it was there, in the minds of the first mystics, that the whispers of prophecy began. The earliest tribes of humanity knew of the warp's dangers, for even then it was a realm of lurking shadows, a mirror to the soul of mankind. The first psychers, shamans, oracles, nameless wise men, saw in their visions an encroaching doom, a storm gathering beyond the veil. They foresaw what humanity could not yet grasp, that the fate of their species would be a war not of armies alone, but of wills, of souls, of unseen battles fought in the very essence of existence. And so, in secret, they came together. Across vast distances, across ages unknown, the greatest of their kind gathered in a final act of defiance against the dark. They did not resist with weapons, nor with incantations of protection. Instead, they sacrificed themselves, not in death, but in the surrender of their very spirits, merging together into something more than human, something singular, a soul vast enough to stand against the horrors to come, a being of incalculable will, intelligence, and power. From this great union he was born. For thousands of years he walked among humanity. He did not seek thrones nor demand fealty. Instead, he watched, he learned, he shaped the course of history in ways imperceptible, guiding, nudging, ensuring that humanity endured where it might have otherwise fallen. Great kingdoms rose and fell at his hand, yet never did he claim rule. He was an architect, not a king, a silent shepherd, not a god. But the whispers of prophecy did not cease. The shadows in the warp had grown restless, hungering, waiting. The great work of the shamans had forged a guardian, but even he was bound by time, by the slow march of entropy. The age of myths faded, and in its place humanity began its ascent, first as scattered tribes, then as civilizations reaching for the stars. And with that ascent came arrogance, folly, and the slow but inevitable descent into the age of strife. The Emperor knew what was to come. He had foreseen it in the echoes of time, in the currents of fate that even he could not fully control. Mankind would rise, and mankind would fall. The horrors that awaited were beyond the comprehension of mortals, and their doom would not come at the hands of mere invaders or warring tribes. It would come from the warp itself, from the things that lurked beyond the veil, waiting for the day when the stars would burn with madness. It was then that he made his choice. He would no longer remain an unseen force in the annals of history. He would no longer shape the world from the shadows. The time for silence had passed. If humanity was to survive, it needed unity. It needed purpose. It needed a ruler strong enough to command the stars, to forge an empire that could stand against the horrors yet to come. But even as he forged the path to galactic dominion, there were already shadows in the periphery, hints of secrets yet to be revealed. Secrets that would one day be struck from history. Secrets that would one day be erased, once mankind stood unchallenged among the stars. The golden age of technology saw the rise of great empires, self-sufficient worlds, and minds so advanced they bent the laws of nature to their will. It was an age of wonders, where science rivaled divinity and humanity had no equal, but arrogance is the herald of ruin. The warp, once a silent, shifting tide, turned hostile. Storms swelled across the void, swallowing entire fleets. Trade routes that had bound the stars together collapsed into chaos. Planets, once thriving under the promise of unity, found themselves alone, cut off, desperate. Isolation bred fear, fear bred war. Thus began the age of strife, an era of unrelenting anarchy. Without the lifelines of interstellar travel, worlds turned inward, hoarding what resources remained. Some regressed into feudal states, their once great cities crumbling into ruin. Others fell to war, as rulers, despots, and tyrants seized power in the absence of higher order. And beyond all this suffering, something far worse stirred. The warp had not merely turned against humanity, it had become hungry. Psychers, once rare, emerged in numbers beyond reckoning. Their minds, untrained, unprotected, became open gates to horrors unseen. Across countless worlds, demons clawed their way into reality. Civilizations were devoured from within, their people twisted into grotesque mockeries of life. What had once been a promise of boundless human potential became a nightmare without end. The Imperium did not yet exist. The Emperor had not yet revealed his hand, but he was watching. For centuries he had walked unnoticed among mankind. He had guided empires from the shadows, whispered into the ears of kings, shaped the course of history with an invisible hand. Yet the age of strife was beyond subtlety. The darkness that now threatened humanity could not be undone with quiet guidance. The time had come to act. Terra, once the cradle of civilization, had become a battleground. The once mighty throne world of mankind had fallen into barbarism. Warlords ruled in fractured dominions, enslaving the weak and warring over the ruins of a forgotten age. It was a world of suffering, drowning in its own blood. It was here that the long war began. The Emperor did not rise as a messiah, nor did he demand devotion. He came as a conqueror, armed with warriors unlike any seen before. Genetically enhanced soldiers, stronger, faster, deadlier than ordinary men. The Thunder Warriors, his first creations, were not meant for diplomacy or governance. They were instruments of war, built to do one thing: destroy. One by one, the warlords of Terra fell. Their banners burned, their fortresses broken, their names consigned to oblivion. In their place, the Emperor carved something new, a vision of unity, a world reforged under his dominion. The unification wars were brutal, but they were necessary. Terra had to be tamed before the greater war could begin. For even as he crushed the warlords, the Emperor's true enemies lay beyond Terra's poisoned skies. He knew that the age of strife was not a natural catastrophe. It had been engineered, twisted by the will of entities lurking beyond the veil of reality. The ruinous powers had seen humanity's potential and sought to devour it before it could rise. But the Emperor would not allow it. The war for Terra was only the beginning. The real war, the war against chaos itself, had yet to begin. The Emperor had spent millennia preparing. His mind had long seen what others could not. that mankind could not merely survive the horrors of the warp. It had to conquer them. And to do so, he would need more than warriors. He would need generals, champions, beings crafted from his own essence. The Primarchs. As Terra fell under his rule, as the last warlords were broken and the first stones of a new empire were laid, he turned his gaze to the stars. The lost children of his design awaited. The galaxy was in ruins, but he would bring order. The long war was far from over. It had only just begun. The unification wars had ended. Terra, once a shattered wasteland of warring factions, now knelt before a single ruler. The Emperor had brought order to the cradle of humanity, yet he knew that what he had built was fragile. The work was not yet finished. What he had forged in blood and fire was only the foundation. The Thunder Warriors had been the tools of conquest, the brutal instruments of his will. They had been created not for diplomacy or empire, but for war alone. Their immense strength and unyielding fury had torn through the warlords of old Earth, crushing all opposition. Yet for all their might, they were imperfect, unstable, crude, and doomed to burn out. Their rage was uncontrollable, their lifespans brief. The Emperor had known from the beginning that they were not the future. Their purpose had been served, and so he cast them aside. The purge was swift. Few Thunder Warriors lived to question their fate. The first of the Emperor's custodians, the golden-clad guardians of his vision, carried out the culling in secret. Some fought back, roaring in defiance against the master who had forged them. Others vanished into the depths of terror, their existence erased from history. The world they had bled to unify would forget them. The Emperor had no room for sentiment. He had already turned his mind towards something greater. The Thunder Warriors had won the war, but they could not build the future. The coming age demanded warriors not just of strength, but of stability. Soldiers who could endure beyond a single campaign. Commanders who could do more than destroy. The Emperor needed leaders, not weapons. Thus began the Primarch project. It was an undertaking unlike anything before it, a work of genetic perfection drawn from the Emperor's own essence. He shaped 20 beings, each one crafted to embody an aspect of his will. They were not merely warriors, but rulers, beings of unparalleled might and intellect, designed to command the legions Astartes and bring order to the galaxy. Each Primarch was a masterpiece, a singular force of nature. Into them, he wove strength beyond mortal limits, intelligence vast enough to outthink entire civilizations, and the charisma to inspire legions. Each bore a different purpose, a different temperament, yet all were meant to serve a single goal, the reunification of humanity. Alongside them, he shaped the Legiones Astartes, their foundations drawn from the same genetic science. Unlike the Thunder Warriors, these warriors were refined, stable, and built to endure. Each legion was to be the reflection of its Primarch, a force that would bring his vision into reality. For a time, the project progressed as intended. The Primarchs gestated within their artificial wombs, growing in secret within the Emperor's laboratory. The final phase was close at hand, and then disaster struck. A warp breach, violent, unnatural, ripped through the Emperor's sanctum. In a single catastrophic moment, the 20 Primarchs were stolen, their nascent forms cast into the void, scattered across the stars. The Emperor did not rage. He did not mourn. But he understood the truth. This was no accident. The warp, the entities lurking beyond the veil, had moved against him. Perhaps they had foreseen what these beings would become, what their presence would mean for the fate of the galaxy. Perhaps they feared them, Or perhaps this was merely the first stroke of a war yet to come. The Emperor did not waver. The Primarchs were lost, but their legacy remained. The legions had already been created. The Great Crusade would go on. If he could not raise his sons at his side, he would find them in the stars. One by one, he would reclaim what had been stolen. Or so he believed. For even as he prepared for the greatest war in human history, he did not yet know the true cost of what had been taken. Not all of his sons would return. 2 names, 2 legacies, 2 sons, erased before their stories could ever be told. The Emperor had long understood that brute strength alone would not be enough to reunite humanity. The Thunder Warriors had proven that might, though useful, was temporary. His dream required something greater, leaders who could command, strategists who could build, and champions who could inspire. Thus, he turned to his grandest ambition, a work of genetic mastery unlike anything before, the Primarch project. Yet power alone was not enough. The Emperor sought control, for he knew the dangers of unchecked ambition. Each Primarch was designed to serve a singular purpose, the unification of mankind beneath a single, unchallenged rule. His rule. They would be brilliant, but bound to his vision, loyal beyond question. He believed he had shaped them to be incorruptible. But he was not the only one watching. There were other forces, ancient and malevolent, who saw his work unfolding. In the timeless currents of the warp, entities of unspeakable power turned their gaze toward these newborn beings. The Primarchs were unlike anything created before, souls woven with precision, minds unclouded by the superstitions that shackled lesser mortals. They were meant to be the mightiest of mankind's warriors, but to the beings that lurked in the warp, they were a threat. And so, in a single moment of disaster, the Emperor's great work was undone. The warp erupted within the depths of his sanctum. A surge of power, violent and unrestrained, swept through the facility, its energies unnatural, deliberate. Before the Emperor could act, before he could contain the storm, his creations were ripped from his grasp. The Primarchs, still in their gestation pods, were torn from reality, scattered into the void, cast across the stars by an unseen hand. The Emperor fought to reclaim them, but it was too late. The warp had stolen them away. He did not rage. He did not wail in despair. Such emotions were beneath him. Instead, he calculated, analyzing the possibilities. This was not chance. Something had intervened. Something had taken them, scattering them deliberately to the far reaches of the galaxy. The ruinous powers, those entities of chaos that festered beyond the veil, had moved against him. Whether to destroy his work or to twist it to their own ends, he could not yet say. But he would not yield. The legions Astartes, already in production, would serve as his vanguard. Though the Primarchs had been lost, their genetic legacy remained. The Emperor still had his armies. The Great Crusade would continue, and he would find them. Yet even in his supreme confidence, questions remained. Had the Primarchs been scattered purely by malice? Or had some greater mechanism been at work? Did the warp act merely as a tool of chaos? Or was there another force unseen guiding their exile? And if so, to what end? The Emperor rarely spoke of what transpired in those moments. To his followers, he declared that the lost sons would be reclaimed, that he would seek them out, no matter how far they had been flung. But deep within his mind, another truth gnawed at him, one he did not speak aloud. Not all of them would be found. There would come a day when 2 of his sons, 2 names erased from history, would be spoken of only in whispers. The Primarchs were lost, scattered by unseen forces across the stars. Yet the Emperor did not abandon his great work. The Great Crusade would press forward, the Legiones Astartes would march, and one by one, his sons would be reclaimed. And they were. Over decades of relentless conquest, the Emperor's lost children were rediscovered, raised upon distant worlds, shaped by the cultures that had found them. From the warrior kings of feral planets to the philosophers of gilded metropolises, each Primarch was unique, their nature moulded by both their gene-forged essence and the worlds that had become their home. They were welcomed back as conquerors, as rulers, as gods among men. But not all of them. 2 names have been lost to time, their records erased, their legacies unwritten. Where once there were 20, the annals of the Imperium speak only of 18. The 2nd and 11th sons, though they once walked among the stars, have been struck from history. Their fate is unknown, their deeds unspoken, their very existence expunged. Yet, for those who know where to look, faint traces remain. The early records of the Great Crusade hint at 20 legions, each bearing the name of its lost father. For a time they fought alongside their brothers, their banners unfurled, their fleets sailing into the void alongside the others. Their warriors bled in the Emperor's name, their triumphs celebrated, their oaths unbroken. But then, as if by decree, they were erased. Their names were no longer spoken, their deeds unwritten, their legions swept from the annals of history as though they had never existed. And in their place, silence. The warriors of their legions, once counted among the Emperor's chosen, simply vanished. No official record speaks of what became of them. No edict explains their removal. They were not cast as traitors, like Horus and his fallen kin. There was no declaration of betrayal, no proclamation of heresy. They were simply gone. But history is not so easily erased. Among the surviving records of the Great Crusade there are fragments, small, scattered mentions of campaigns fought alongside legions that no longer exist. Certain worlds, long since purged, bear markings of Legiones Astartes no longer recognized. The whispers of remembrances, those historians who traveled with the Crusade, suggest that something terrible befell these lost legions, something unspeakable. There are accounts, buried deep within the archives of certain Imperial scholars, that tell of Primarchs who defied the path laid before them. Not in the way of Horus, not as betrayers to the Emperor, but as something else. Some speak of dissent, of words spoken in opposition to the grand vision of the Imperium. Others hint at flaws, at some deep imperfection that made their existence untenable. But perhaps the most unsettling theory is this, that these Primarchs did not fail the Emperor. Rather, the Emperor failed them. Were they sacrificed for some greater cause, their lives and legacies erased in service to a secret only he could know? Did they uncover some truth, some forbidden knowledge that made them unfit to stand beside their brothers? Or did they simply refuse, not through rebellion, but through conviction, to walk the path the Emperor demanded of them? The truth remains unknown. Those who might have known it are long since dead. Their brothers, the 18 who remain in memory, do not speak of them. Even those closest to the Emperor, those who should have questioned such an erasure, have remained silent. And yet, the echoes persist. In the far reaches of the galaxy, there are places where the Imperium does not tread, where the symbols of the lost legions are still found upon forgotten ruins. There are stories, barely whispers, of warriors who do not exist. Astartes clad in unrecognized heraldry, fighting wars beyond the Emperor's sight. It is said that nothing is ever truly erased, not even the forgotten, not even the doomed. The Imperium of man is built upon a foundation of silence. Its history is not an unbroken record of triumph, nor an honest account of its past, but a carefully curated narrative, shaped by those who decide what must be remembered and what must be erased. Of all the Imperium's hidden truths, few are as profound as the loss of the two missing Primarchs. Where once there were 20, now there are 18. This is not speculation, not myth, but fact. Their absence is not an accident. It is deliberate. The Mechanicus, keepers of the grand archives of Mars, hold no records of them. The Librarium of Terror, where the deeds of the Great Crusade are enshrined, omits their names. Even the official structure of the Legions Astartes shows a gap, numbered 2 and 11, but never spoken of. This is not the work of war or misfortune. This is censorship on a scale beyond reckoning. To erase a figure as mighty as a Primarch is no small thing. These were not mere generals or warriors. They were demigods, beings shaped by the Emperor himself, leaders of legions that spanned the stars. Their presence shaped the course of history. And yet they are gone, their stories unwritten, their warriors absent. What could have warranted such an erasure? The Imperium, for all its rigid doctrine, does not simply strike names from its annals without cause. The traitors of the Horus heresy, those who turned against the Emperor and plunged the galaxy into ruin, were never erased. Their names remain burned into history: Lorgar, Perturabo, Magnus, Horus himself. Their crimes are spoken of in warnings, their treachery used as a lesson for all who follow. But the 2nd and 11th? Nothing. No accusations, no warnings, no records of their fall, no tales of their last battles, just absence. Yet, for all the silence, whispers remain. There are stray references in early accounts of the Great Crusade. The remembrancers who chronicled the early conquests sometimes left behind fragmented notes, hints of interactions with Primarchs whose names are now forbidden. Scattered reports suggest that they were present in the earliest days of the Imperium, their legions marching alongside their brothers. But at some point, perhaps suddenly, perhaps gradually, they were erased. Some surviving texts suggest a purging, not in battle against an enemy, but by imperial decree. There are accounts, buried deep in Mechanicus archives, of entire fleets vanishing overnight, their ships expunged from record, their warriors never spoken of again. Some speculate that their own brothers carried out their destruction. Others suggest that the Emperor himself ordered their removal, deeming them unfit for his vision. The reasons remain elusive. Were they destroyed for deviating from the Emperor's plan? Did they uncover something forbidden, something that could not be allowed to exist? Or were they taken by forces beyond even the Emperor's control? The official records will never tell us. The Imperium ensures that the truth remains buried. To ask too many questions is to invite scrutiny, and scrutiny, in a regime built upon obedience, is dangerous. There are things one does not ask about, things one does not seek. And yet, there are still inconsistencies. Within the depths of the Librarius of the Inquisition, certain redacted reports reference worlds whose populations were subjected to extreme purges, not by Xenos, nor by traitors, but by the Imperium itself. These worlds bore inscriptions, monuments, relics of legions that do not exist. There are myths, passed in hushed voices among the scholars of the Ordo Hereticus, of warriors still wandering the void, bearing the insignia of legions that should never have been. And among the older Space Marine chapters, among the sons of the known Primarchs, there are uneasy silences when the missing ones are mentioned. Some seem to remember more than they say. Others act as though the question is one not meant to be answered. But for all the theories, all the forbidden records, one thing is certain. Their names were erased for a reason. And whatever that reason was, the Imperium has decided that mankind must never know it. The legions of the Emperor were once 20 in number, each a reflection of their lost father, each a blade honed for the Great Crusade. They had been created for conquest, to carry the dream of unity to the farthest reaches of the stars. And yet, not all would fulfill that destiny. 2 of the 20 were cast into oblivion, their names struck from record, their deeds unspoken. They had stood among their brothers once, their banners unfurled in the fire of the Great Crusade. Their warriors had bled alongside the sons of Dawn, Russ, Guilliman, and Sanguinius. And then, without warning, without explanation, they were gone, erased, utterly undone. Their names would never be spoken again. Their worlds, once bastions of imperial might, were lost. Their legions, once counted among the Emperor's chosen, vanished as though they had never been. Their erasure was so complete, so absolute, that even the surviving Primarchs would not speak of them. And yet, there had been a time when they were known. Among the records of the early Great Crusade, there are fleeting traces of their existence. A forgotten campaign fought upon a world now nameless, where warriors clad in unremembered colors stood at the Emperor's side. A fragment of text, so carefully redacted that only the numeral 2 remains, lingering in the void of erased words. The echoes of their presence, scattered in archives long since sealed, whisper of great deeds now forbidden. The erasure was not merely a destruction of records. It was an execution, carried out upon reality itself. They had not simply died. They had been removed. Some who were there in the early days spoke in hushed voices of a reckoning, a moment when the Emperor himself passed judgment upon his lost sons. There was no declaration, no condemnation in the manner of the fallen. Their names were not spoken in hate, nor their faces burned into the memories of their brothers as traitors. There was only silence, a silence that came with fire. There are remnants of battles fought between the Great Crusade's own warriors, wars that no history records, conflicts where Astartes fought Astartes in the deep black of space, their allegiances lost to time. There are shattered worlds, long since buried under layers of imperial control, where the ruins speak of destruction wrought by the Emperor's own hand. What crime could have warranted such a fate? No heresy was ever named. No treason was ever declared. The Imperium does not erase its enemies. It destroys them, makes them into warnings for all who follow. The traitors of the Horus heresy still exist in record, their deeds burned into history. But the lost Primarchs, they were erased even from memory. Some say they had turned from the Emperor before the path of the Great Crusade was set in stone. That in the early days, when the Imperium was still an unshaped thing, when the rule of terror was not yet an empire, but an idea, these sons had spoken words that could not be tolerated, that they had seen something within the Emperor's vision that they could not accept. Others believe they were struck down for what they had become, that the flaw was not in their loyalty, but in their very existence, that their legions had changed, that the warriors who followed them had become something that should not have been allowed to endure. There are those who whisper that the Emperor did not kill them in anger nor in war, but in sorrow, that he had made a mistake, one that could not be allowed to stand, that their deaths were not executions, but a necessary sacrifice to ensure the Imperium's survival. The echoes of their passing still linger. There are places where their presence can still be felt, where the Imperium does not tread, where ruins bear the marks of unremembered warriors. The stars still hold secrets, even in the age of endless war. The lost sons are gone. Their legions are dust, But nothing is ever truly erased, not even the doomed. The Emperor did not hesitate. He did not waver. His will was law, his purpose undeniable. From the moment he set his grand design into motion, he had known what sacrifices would be required. To build an empire, to create the Imperium, to bring order to the chaos of mankind, nothing could be left to chance. Every decision was made with absolute certainty, every act committed with the unwavering belief that it was necessary, even when that necessity demanded the erasure of his own sons. It is spoken of only in whispers, the great purging, the hidden war that took place before the Horus heresy, before the Imperium was shattered by its own hubris. Unlike the wars fought against the Xenos, against the lost civilizations of man, against the towering horrors of the warp, this war was different. This was a war within. There is no record of it in Imperial history, no grand proclamations, no triumphant declarations of victory. No statues stand in honor of those who fought. No songs are sung of the battles waged. There is only silence. And in that silence there is something far more terrible than war. Because war is remembered. The traitors of the Horus heresy are remembered. Lorgar, the first to turn. Magnus, whose hubris doomed him. Horus, the favored son who fell the farthest. Their names are burned into the annals of history as warnings. They are spoken of so that others may know their fate, so that no one will follow in their footsteps. Their betrayal was terrible, but it was allowed to exist. The lost sons of the 2nd and 11th were not. Their fate was something else entirely. They were not condemned. They were not punished. They were erased. But erasure leaves scars. In the earliest days of the Great Crusade, before the records were scoured, their presence can still be felt. There are gaps in the chronologies, inconsistencies where once there were 20 Primarchs, where once there were 20 legions. There are accounts, redacted, censored, buried in the darkest corners of Imperial history, that hint at their existence. Fleeting mentions of campaigns fought alongside unknown warriors, of alliances that suddenly, inexplicably, ceased to be. And then, the silence. Something happened. Something that demanded not just destruction, but removal. And though history does not record the moment, the weight of it remains. It lingers in the silence of those who should remember. Leman Russ, the Emperor's executioner, knows. Though he has led many purges, carried out many cullings in the name of the Imperium, there is one he has never spoken of. The rout of Fenris, the destruction of Prospero, these are remembered, their reasons justified. But there was another task, another mission given to him long before the heresy, and whatever transpired in that long-forgotten war, it left its mark upon him. Rogel Dawn, the unbreakable fortress, knows. His resolve has never faltered, his loyalty never wavered. But when he is asked, when the subject is broached, his answer is not defiance nor justification. It is silence. And silence is not the way of dawn. And Guilliman, the architect of order, knows. Among all his brothers, none sought to build the Imperium as he did. None saw the Emperor's dream with such clarity. And yet, when asked of the lost, when pressed for what he remembers, he turns away. His measured words falter. His vision, so unyielding in all other things, dims. For even among the greatest of the Emperor's sons, there are things they dare not speak of. The Emperor saw something in the lost sons, something that could not be allowed to exist. The records will never say what it was. Perhaps it was rebellion, not the open defiance of Horus, but something deeper, something more insidious. Perhaps it was failure, a weakness that could not be tolerated, a flaw that made them unworthy of the future he was building. Or perhaps it was something worse. Perhaps the lost sons were not merely failures, but something else entirely. Something that, had it been allowed to endure, would have unmade everything. The Emperor did not create them to rule. He created them to serve, to bring his will to the stars, to execute his grand vision without question. If they had refused, if they had seen something in his design that they could not abide, would he not have erased them before they could spread their dissent? If they had become something more, something even he could not control, would he not have removed them from history itself? There was no trial, no declaration of treachery. The 2nd and 11th were simply gone. The Great Purging was not war. It was a correction. A correction so absolute that even the Primarchs who remained could not bear to speak of it. Even the Emperor, in all his might, in all his certainty, must have known what it meant. That the sons he had created, the sons he had shaped from his own essence, had been struck down by his own hand. That in erasing them, he had committed a sin so great that even the Imperium would never dare to name it. The lost sons are gone. Their legions are dust. Their memory is a void that no one dares to fill. But nothing is ever truly erased. Even in silence the echoes endure. Even in the void, their shadows remain. The ruinous powers have always lurked beyond the veil of reality, waiting for their moment to strike. Before the rise of the Imperium, before the age of strife, before the first true steps of mankind among the stars, the great enemy had already laid its foundations. The warp was never meant to be understood, never meant to be touched by mortal hands. And yet, it calls to those who seek knowledge, those who look too deeply into the abyss. It is whispered that the lost sons, the 2nd and 11th, were not simply victims of fate or disobedience, but casualties of a war that history dares not name. A war not waged with bolters and blades, but with knowledge too dangerous to be wielded. The truth of the primordial annihilator, the eternal foe of all that exists, had been known to the Emperor long before he set foot upon the Great Crusade. He had spent millennia preparing, fortifying his mind and will against the whispers of the warp, shaping the future in anticipation of the storm that would one day come. But he was only one being, and even he had limits. Thus, the lost sons may have been his greatest experiment. There are those who believe that the 2nd and 11th were not like their brothers, that they were not merely warriors, not simply rulers destined to govern and command, that they were built for something else entirely, to understand chaos, to study it, to control it. A weapon against the warp, shaped in flesh and blood. The Emperor was not infallible. He saw chaos as a force to be denied, suppressed, ignored. Yet even he must have known that such an enemy could not be defeated by ignorance alone. And so, perhaps, he sought to use it, to wield it, to shape it into something he could control. And who better to bear that burden than 2 of his own sons? If this was their fate, then it was one doomed from the start. The Primarchs were not created as mere mortals. Their souls burned brighter, their presence within the warp more potent than any human could ever comprehend. And for those touched by chaos, there is no middle ground. You conquer it, or it conquers you. The silent war may have begun the moment these sons were found. They were raised in secrecy, tested against horrors that no other legion would face. Their legions, trained in doctrines that have long since been erased, fought battles that no one would remember. Their campaigns did not mark planets for conquest, but for purification. It is said that entire systems burned, not from war, but from something far worse, from contamination, from taint, from the creeping corruption that no blade can kill. And then, one day, they were gone. Did they succumb? Were they consumed by the very knowledge they had sought to master? Did they see something, some fundamental truth that shattered them, that turned them against their father, that made them dangerous in a way even Horus never was? Or was it the Emperor who decided that their existence was too great a risk? It is said that the Space Wolves were once called to war against a brother, that Russ, the Emperor's executioner, led his warriors against a foe who was not an enemy, but kin. Prospero is remembered as the world that burned beneath the wrath of the Vulca Fenrica. But before Prospero, there was another. The lost sun, hunted, destroyed, buried in silence. And yet even in death, the shadows remain. The Great Crusade was built upon silence, upon hidden truths. The Inquisition would later become the shield that kept the Imperium from looking too deeply, but long before its existence, there were already secrets. The Primarchs who remained knew more than they ever revealed. They knew why their brothers had been erased. They knew what had been purged, and they chose not to speak of it. The truth would have been too much to bear. The silent war was never recorded, never spoken of. It is a war that was fought and ended before the Imperium was fully formed, a war that could not be remembered, because to do so would be to invite its horror once more. The lost sons are gone, their legions scattered to the void, their names removed from time. But the war they fought, the knowledge they carried, the truths they uncovered, may still linger. For nothing in the warp is truly forgotten, and no secret stays buried forever. A legion is more than warriors, more than fleets, more than banners carried into war. A legion is its Primarch. He is the guide, the architect, the reason for its existence. He is the anchor upon which his warriors define themselves, the source of their purpose. Without him, a legion is adrift, a weapon without a hand to wield it. And yet, for 2 legions that fate was sealed. The warriors of the 2nd and 11th had fought and bled for the Emperor. They had waged war in the Great Crusade, had raised the Aquila over conquered worlds, had stood beside their brothers as they pushed the frontiers of the Imperium ever outward. They had existed, and then they were gone. It was not a slow decline, not the gradual dissolution of a force lost to attrition. It was a removal, swift, absolute, and final. Their Primarchs were struck from history, and with them, their warriors. Their banners were taken down, their records purged, their victories and sacrifices buried beneath silence. Where once they had stood in glory, now there was nothing. The Imperium does not forget, it does not forgive. The traitors of the Horus heresy remain, their names spoken with venom, their legacies remembered in blood and fire. Their stories endure as warnings, their deeds burned into history to ensure they will never be repeated. But the lost legions? Their names are not spoken at all. No edict explains their absence, no record details their fate. The Imperium remembers its enemies. It does not remember them. Yet even the most absolute erasure leaves traces. The void in history is not empty. It is heavy, pressing, suffocating in its silence. Among the legions that remain, there are those who carry the weight of knowledge they dare not speak. Leman Russ, the executioner of the Emperor, bore his duty without question, carried out his orders without hesitation. But there was one task he never spoke of, one war that was never recorded. When asked of the lost, he did not answer. Rogel Dawn, the unyielding, who stood firm against the heresy, who never broke even in the face of the Imperium's darkest hour, turned away when the question was raised. Robut Gilliman, the scholar, the strategist, the builder of empires, offered no words at all. The warriors of the lost legions did not simply disappear. They had fought, they had conquered, they had left their mark upon the galaxy. They had not been defeated in battle. They had been removed. Some say they were exterminated. That the order came from the Emperor himself, a decree carried out with cold precision. That their legions, tainted in some irredeemable way, were hunted down, not by Xenos, not by traitors, but by their own kin. The Space Wolves had been the Emperor's blade before, unleashed to cull those who had strayed too far. Perhaps they had done so before Prospero. If this was the truth, then it was a crime beyond reckoning. The Imperium had wiped civilizations from existence before, had destroyed entire species to make way for mankind's rule. But to erase its own sons, to burn them from history with such finality, that was something else entirely. Others believed they were not killed, but scattered, that their warriors, now bereft of a Primarch, were absorbed into other forces. Among the remaining legions, one in particular grew beyond all others. The Ultramarines. Their numbers dwarfed their brothers. Their forces spread across 1,000 worlds. Had it always been so? Or had they swelled in secret, reinforced by warriors who no longer had a name, who no longer had a home? The truth will never be known. The records are gone. The names are gone. Even the memories are gone. And yet, the void remains. There are ruins among the stars that do not belong to any known legion. Battlefields where the inscriptions do not match the heraldry of any Primarch who still exists. Worlds where whispers tell of warriors who still fight, clad in armor that should not be, carrying banners that should not exist. The lost legions are gone, but their shadows remain. Perhaps they always will. The Emperor saw further than any being who had ever lived. His mind stretched across time, weaving possibilities, seeing what others could not. Every war, every conquest, every sacrifice was a thread in the grand tapestry of his design. Nothing he did was without purpose. And yet, within that design, there were scars, wounds that could not be allowed to fester. The 2nd and 11th had once marched alongside their brothers. Their legions had fought, bled, and conquered in the name of the Imperium. Then they were gone, erased not by time, not by war, but by the Emperor's own decree. The silence that followed their removal was not one of forgetfulness, but of intent. This was not history lost. This was history destroyed. The Imperium does not erase without reason. The Emperor does not act without cause. The lost sons did not simply vanish. They were removed, torn from the grand vision before their presence could fracture it beyond repair. Perhaps it had always been inevitable. The Primarchs were created to bring unity, yet they were all different. Each was shaped with a unique strength, a facet of the Emperor's will made manifest. But not all facets could be allowed to remain. Some were mistakes, some were dangerous, some could not be controlled. A Primarch who did not fit within the design was not a Primarch who could remain at all. The Great Crusade was not merely about reclaiming lost human worlds. It was about molding the Imperium into the Emperor's image. No deviations, no divergence. The galaxy was to be reforged under a singular rule, and that rule was his alone. But what if 2 of his sons did not conform? What if their minds, their ideals, their very essence stood at odds with what he demanded? The Emperor did not tolerate uncertainty. He had seen what happened to empires that allowed debate, that allowed compromise. Unity through power required total obedience. And so, the lost sons were not exiled. They were not imprisoned. They were unmade, not out of hatred, nor out of anger, but because they had to be. The Imperium could not afford questions in its infancy. The Great Crusade could not afford dissonance among its greatest generals. The Emperor could not allow something he could not control. The Primarchs were more than mortal men. They were something else, each one a force unto himself, a being capable of reshaping the destiny of entire civilizations. Even the Emperor, for all his brilliance, could not fully predict what they would become once scattered across the stars. Some would emerge stronger than he had intended. Some would return with power beyond what was safe. Perhaps the lost sons had become something too much, not flawed, but too perfect, not weak, but too strong. Their potential had grown in ways that could not be allowed to exist. The Emperor did not act out of fear. He did not fear anything. But he understood risk. He understood that the great work he had begun could not be derailed by two misplaced pieces on the board. And so they were taken off it. Those who remained did not speak of it. Russ, the executioner, carried out the Emperor's orders without hesitation. He had slain a brother before. Perhaps he had slain another before that. But where the rout of Prospero was a lesson burned into history, this war was left in silence. Dawn, the unyielding, never flinched in battle, never turned away from war. And yet, when asked, when pressed, his gaze fell. Guilliman, who built empires from the ashes of war, did not even acknowledge the question. The scholar, the logician, the master of record and order, chose to say nothing at all. And Malcador, closest to the Emperor, the one who knew more than any other, the one who had stood beside him before the first Primarch had ever drawn breath, when asked of the lost sons, spoke only these words: "It is better this way." The lost sons were gone, their legions wiped away, their names stripped from time. But the silence remains. The Imperium was built upon war, built upon conquest, upon sacrifice, upon the blood of those who fell to pave the way for the future. But it was also built upon secrets, and this was the greatest of them. Even in death, they haunt the Imperium. Even in erasure, they are not truly forgotten. The Emperor's design was perfect. His vision was absolute. And yet, in the quiet places of the Imperium, in the whispers of forgotten archives, in the uneasy silence of those who still remember, there lingers the faintest trace of regret. The Imperium is built upon certainty, the certainty of war, of sacrifice, of the divine will of the Emperor. It does not abide mystery. It does not tolerate uncertainty. What is forgotten is meant to stay forgotten. What is erased is meant to remain erased. And yet, in the depths of the warp, where time and reality do not hold their shape, nothing is ever truly gone. There are whispers, not spoken in the halls of terror, not recorded in the archives of the Adeptus Administratum, but whispered in the cold silence of deep space stations, in the fevered ravings of dying astropaths, in the dreams of those who can hear the voices of the Immaterium. They speak of warriors who do not exist. They speak of a presence that lingers in the spaces between thought and memory. They speak of the lost. There are psychers who claim to hear voices calling out from beyond the veil, voices that should not be. These are not the vile whispers of the ruinous powers, nor the mindless echoes of the damned. These voices are different, calm, deliberate, filled with sorrow but not madness. Those who hear them describe a feeling of something watching, something waiting just beyond reach, just beyond knowing. Among the black ships, where the Imperium gathers its psychers for sacrifice to the Golden Throne, there are records of seers who have screamed in terror, their minds collapsing under the weight of something that does not exist. When asked what they saw, they only mutter a number. 2, 11. The Inquisition has sealed many such records, unwilling to acknowledge their implications. Those who seek too deeply into the past disappear. Those who attempt to catalogue the anomalies find their work erased, their existence scrubbed from Imperial records as surely as the lost Primarchs themselves. Even among the Space Marines, whose memories are long and whose minds are disciplined against the lies of the warp, there is unease when the missing sons are mentioned. The oldest among them, those who have fought since the days of the Great Crusade, sometimes hesitate when recounting the histories of their legions. It is as though they remember something that they should not, something that lingers at the edges of their thoughts like a dream half forgotten. On certain worlds, ancient ruins bear markings that belong to no known legion. The symbols are crude, weathered by time, yet they do not match any of the 18 recorded gene lines of the Adeptus Astartes. Their origin is unknown, their presence unexplained. When Imperial scholars attempt to study them, their findings are lost, their ships suffer malfunctions, their transmissions fall silent before reaching Terra. In the depths of space, beyond the reach of the Astronomicon, there are void wrecks, derelict vessels of unknown origin, their hulls inscribed with sigils that match no known chapter. Explorator fleets have found them drifting in the abyss, their decks covered in dust, their corridors silent. But the corpses within, armored giants frozen in time, bear no insignia. Their armor is ancient, their war gear unlike anything seen since the dawn of the Imperium. And in some of these silent graveyards, the bodies are missing. The ships, untouched for thousands of years, show signs of movement. The warp does not forget. The Imperium insists that the lost sons are gone, that their fate is sealed, that they are dust and memory. But in the places where reality is weakest, in the tides of the immaterium where time and truth are mutable, there are anomalies that defy reason. Some believe the lost Primarchs are not truly dead, that they were not slain but exiled, cast into the void in a way no mortal could comprehend. Some say they are trapped in the warp itself, their souls forever fighting against the darkness that sought to consume them. Others whisper that they walk still, hidden from the eyes of the Imperium, guiding forgotten warriors in the shadows, waiting for a time when they may return. The truth is unknown. The Imperium will not seek it. But the echoes remain, and echoes, no matter how faint, are never truly silent. The Emperor's vision was not of mere conquest. The Great Crusade was not simply a war to reclaim the lost colonies of mankind. It was a means to an end, a stepping stone to something far greater. He did not seek dominion over the stars for its own sake, nor did he wage war for glory. His purpose was to reshape the very fabric of existence, to elevate humanity beyond the reach of the horrors lurking in the immaterium. The Imperium as it exists today is a fractured shadow of what he intended. It was never meant to rely upon the warp, never meant to be shackled to the dangerous, unstable tides of the immaterium. The Emperor knew that to depend on it was to be at the mercy of beings that should not exist. The navigators, the astropaths, the great vessels that traverse the stars, all were compromises, temporary measures, until the true path could be forged. The Webway was that path. It was not his creation, but a relic of a civilization older than mankind itself. The Eldar had once ruled through its endless corridors, a labyrinth of tunnels and passages through the depths of the universe, untouched by the warp. Where human ships relied on the unpredictable tides of chaos, the Webway was stable, untainted, incorruptible. To master it would be to sever humanity's dependence on the warp entirely. And so, in the depths beneath Terra, the Emperor labored in secret. His greatest work, hidden from even his sons, was not the legions, nor the conquest of the galaxy, but the carving of a new path, one that would end humanity's reliance on the powers that had preyed upon it for millennia. a gate, a passage into the Webway crafted by his own hand. Few knew of its existence, fewer still understood its significance. But there are those who believe that the Webway project was not merely a dream of a future free from chaos, but the key to the fate of the lost Primarchs. Their removal was swift, their names stricken from all records, their legions scattered or destroyed. But there are whispers, fragments of knowledge buried deep in the forgotten archives of Mars, in the ruins of lost worlds, hints that they were not erased because of failure or treachery, but because of something far more dangerous. Some believe that the 2nd and 11th were not like their brothers, that they had been created for a different purpose, one even the other Primarchs did not share. The Emperor did not shape his sons without reason. Each was designed to fulfill a role in the Great Crusade, to bring order to the stars in his name. But what if 2 of them had been shaped for something beyond war? There are theories that they were not meant to conquer worlds, nor to rule over mortal men, but to tread where even their father could not. That they were to be the Emperor's hands in the Webway, the first of a new order, beings who could navigate the labyrinthine passages of that ancient network, who could shape it, expand it, master it in ways the Emperor had not yet revealed. If true, it would explain much. The Webway was not an empty road. It was a battlefield, a war zone against ancient horrors that even the Emperor could not control. When he began his work, he did not do so unopposed. The forces that lurked in its shadows, the remnants of a time before humanity, resisted him. The project was not a simple matter of construction, it was a war against the unknown. The lost sons may have been its first casualties, or its first weapons. If the Emperor sent them into the Webway, it was because he believed they could endure what awaited within. If they were unmade, it was because they had seen too much, or because their very presence had changed something in ways that could not be undone. It is whispered that when the Webway project collapsed, when the Golden Throne became a prison instead of a gateway, it was not simply because of Magnus's folly, that there were other forces at play, things that had already begun to unravel before the 1,000 Suns shattered the veil, that the Emperor had already lost something in that war. Perhaps it was not only a project that had been ruined, perhaps it was 2 sons. If they had perished, their deaths were silent. If they had survived, their fate was one the Emperor did not allow to be known. The Webway swallowed them, or the Emperor himself cast them into oblivion, sealing away what they had become. The lost sons were erased. The Webway project collapsed. The Imperium was left to its fate, chained forever to the warp, to the darkness the Emperor had tried to escape. And yet deep beneath Terra, the ruins of that dream still linger. Sealed tunnels, forgotten mechanisms, passages leading into the unknown. The remnants of an empire that was never born. And in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, there are places where the Webway still flickers with life, where something waits. The Emperor's body remains upon the Golden Throne, a shattered husk, a vessel that has long since withered. His mortal flesh is gone, consumed by the unrelenting fire of the Imperium. His body decays, his bones turning to dust upon the seat of his power, yet his mind endures. The Imperium calls it divinity, the High Lords name it sacrifice. But beneath the towering spires of the Imperial Palace, in the vaults of knowledge that none are permitted to enter, there are whispers of something else. There are those who believe the Emperor is not simply dying, but transforming. The Star Child, the name is barely spoken now, lost to doctrine, buried beneath the weight of the ecclesiarchy's iron faith. But the old texts still hold its meaning, a prophecy, a fate that was never meant to be uttered aloud. It speaks of the Emperor's consciousness breaking apart, his essence scattering into the void of the warp, coalescing into something new. Not a corpse rotting in a golden prison, but a force preparing to be reborn. The Imperium would never accept this truth. To them, the Emperor must always be as he was, unchanging, eternal, a god in form and will. But even within the highest orders of the Inquisition, there are those who suspect that he is not entirely whole. His mind is fragmented, pieces of his being drifting beyond the material, beyond what can be understood. Some say he reaches out. Among the black ships, where psychers are gathered for sacrifice, there are those who do not scream as they are fed to the throne. Some whisper before the light consumes them. They speak of dreams, of a voice that does not belong to the Emperor they were taught to worship. They speak of a child made of light, waiting beyond the void. They do not die with terror in their eyes. They die smiling. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in their endless reverence for the throne, refuse to acknowledge its decline. They replace its failing components, layering technology upon technology, binding the Emperor tighter and tighter to the physical realm, refusing to let him leave. But there are records, hidden deep within Mars, of a time when his body first began to fail, when the first tech priests heard whispers emanating from the machine, not from the man entombed within, but from something beyond it, something reaching outward, seeking something lost. It is said that in the great black library of the Eldar, there are fragments of prophecy concerning the human emperor, scattered across ages of war and ruin. The Eldar, for all their arrogance, do not claim to understand his nature. They do not name him as they name their own dying gods. But there are texts that speak of a being who will be torn apart and yet endure, whose soul will scatter but never fade. The Webway project failed. The Great Crusade was undone. The Horus heresy left the Imperium in ruins. But the Emperor's plan was never merely for conquest. It was for the future, for something beyond this crude age of war and bloodshed. If he foresaw his fate, if he knew he would be bound to the throne, then perhaps he knew something more. That this was not the end, but a threshold. If the Star Child is real, then the Emperor's death will not be death at all. And if he returns, if his mind is reborn in the void, if the final act of his great work has yet to come, then those who were lost, those whose names were stricken from history, may yet have a role to play. The lost sons were erased, their legions were destroyed. But nothing in the warp is truly lost. If they were cast into the abyss, if they were exiled to some unseen fate, then it was not without reason. Perhaps they were removed because they saw too much. Perhaps they were taken because they were meant for something else. Something that has not yet begun. And in the darkness of the immaterium, beyond the reach of time, beyond the veil of reality, the echoes still stir. The Emperor waits. The lost remain. And the stars whisper of what is still to come. The Imperium does not tolerate questions. It does not abide uncertainty. Truth, in its rawest form, is dangerous. The fabric of the Imperium is woven from faith, not reason, and its survival depends upon the rigid control of what can and cannot be known. The ecclesiarchy ensures this control is absolute. There is no room for dissent within the cult imperialis. The Emperor is God, the Imperium is his divine kingdom, and the scriptures decree all that must be known. What exists outside this truth is heresy, and heresy is death. This doctrine is not upheld by mere belief, but by force. The Inquisition scours the galaxy for those who seek forbidden knowledge, those who pry too deeply into the past. The Black Ships, the Schola Progenium, the Ordo Hereticus, all exist to preserve ignorance where ignorance is necessary. The Imperium does not suffer curiosity. It burns it. There are histories that must never be spoken. The fate of the 2nd and 11th Legions is among them. There was a time long ago when remembrancers chronicled the Great Crusade, when scholars sought to record every triumph of the Emperor's grand campaign. They wrote of the Primarchs, the Legions, the victories that shaped the stars. And yet, in the oldest records, there are gaps. A silence where names should be. Battles fought by ghosts. Fleets that never existed. The suppression of these records is not the work of time or accident. It is deliberate, carried out with ruthless efficiency. The Administratum does not forget. The Order Redactus ensures it. The great librariums of terror contain archives stretching back to the days before the Imperium's birth. Yet within them, there is nothing of the lost sons. Not even whispers remain. Yet in the darkest vaults, among the inquisitorial archives, among the sealed tombs of knowledge where only the most powerful may tread, there are traces. Not full accounts, not names. Just the echoes of something that once was. Mentions of a great purging. Of a decision so final, so absolute, that even the Emperor's closest sons will not speak of it. Those who have sought the truth have suffered for it. There have been inquisitors who have turned their gaze toward the lost legions, believing they could piece together what had been buried. They vanish. Their work is erased. Their names are removed from the rolls of the Ordos, their deeds never spoken of again. There are scholars who have sought to understand the gaps in the Great Crusade's history, who have dared to ask why 20 Primarchs were made but only 18 remain. Their fates are the same. If they are lucky, they are burned. If not, they are taken. The black ships are not only for psychers, and there are others, Astartes, warriors of the Adeptus Astartes, whose gene memory carries fragments of a past they should not recall. Those old enough, those whose lifespans have stretched across the millennia, have moments of hesitation when they speak of the past. A pause, a glance, as if something stirs in their minds that should not be there. But they do not speak. They know better. It is not only the ecclesiarchy that enforces this silence, it is the Imperium itself. Because whatever truth was erased was not merely dangerous, it was unbearable. Some say the lost sons committed a sin so great that their very memory had to be wiped from existence. Others say they saw a truth so profound that they could not be allowed to live. And there are those in the depths of the warp who whisper that they were not erased because they were a threat to the Imperium, but because they were its salvation. If this is true, then the Imperium has built itself upon a lie so deep, so vast, that to unravel it would bring everything crashing down, and that is why the truth will never be known. Because knowledge is power, and power is the one thing the Imperium fears most. The Imperium declares them gone. Their names are erased, their legacies shattered, their very existence condemned to silence. But silence is not the same as death. There are those who believe the lost sons did not perish, but were cast into exile, beyond the reach of history, beyond the light of the Emperor's realm. The void is endless. The Imperium, for all its vastness, for all the billions of stars it claims dominion over, is but a fraction of the galaxy. There are regions of space where no human vessel has ever set foot, sectors where the Astronomicon does not shine, places where the Imperium's reach falters and is swallowed by the dark. If the Emperor did not destroy his lost sons, then perhaps he sent them away, beyond the edge of known space, beyond the sight of even the most watchful eyes. Some claim they were banished, not slain, not purged, but cast out. That the Emperor, in his infinite will, could not bear to destroy his own creations, but could not allow them to remain. That he sealed them away, far from terror, far from the Great Crusade, into the black void, where their voices would never be heard again. The exile theory has persisted for centuries, whispered among those who dare to think beyond what is permitted. It is said that during the Great Crusade, there were regions of space deemed forbidden, entire systems marked as places where Imperial vessels were not to tread. Not because of Xenos, not because of warp storms, but because of something else, a presence that should not be disturbed. There are worlds deep within unexplored regions of space where ruins stand that do not belong to the Imperium, where inscriptions bear symbols unknown to any of the remaining legions. There are faint, distorted signals picked up by long-range Vox relays, ancient transmissions that do not match any known Imperial dialect. Some speak of ghost fleets, ships of forgotten design, moving in the abyss beyond the Imperium's borders, following no known star chart, answering to no recognized authority. If the lost suns survived, what have they become? The Imperium changes those who leave it. A single century beyond its reach can twist even the most loyal servant into something unrecognizable. The lost Primarchs, if they were sent beyond its grasp, have been gone for 10,000 years. What would they be now? Would they still resemble their brothers? Would they still cling to the ideals of the Great Crusade? Or would time, distance, and exile have reshaped them into something else? Some whisper that they have built an empire of their own in the void, a kingdom of forgotten warriors, soldiers who still march beneath banners that the Imperium has tried to erase. If they remain, their followers would no longer resemble the legions of old. Their teachings would have diverged, their philosophies twisted by isolation, by the burden of being cast aside. And if they still live, the most terrible question remains: could they return? There are those who believe that they have never stopped watching, that somewhere in the deep black, beyond the void of Imperial space, the lost suns wait, that they see the Imperium for what it has become, a crumbling empire built on dogma and blood, bound in stagnation and decay, ruled not by the grand vision of the Emperor, but by the fearful hands of lesser men. The Imperium has forgotten them, but they have not forgotten the Imperium. If they return, it will not be as the brothers of Guilliman or Russ or Dawn. It will be as something else entirely, and when that day comes, the Imperium will have no record of what it once cast away, no understanding of what it will face, only the silence that lingers before the storm. The Imperium rots. It was once the greatest empire humanity had ever known, a colossus spanning the stars, built upon conquest, unity, and the unbreakable will of the Emperor. But time has worn it down. The cracks have deepened, spreading through its very foundation, widening with each passing century. The Astronomicon flickers, the Adeptus Terra drowns in its own bureaucracy, and war has become the only constant. The Imperium was meant to be a golden age, a bastion of order in a hostile galaxy. Now it is a kingdom of ruin, where faith has replaced reason, where ignorance is law, where the dream of unity has been lost to the suffocating weight of oppression. The Emperor remains upon his golden throne, neither living nor dead, a silent god bound in a prison of flesh and machinery. His Imperium was never meant to be like this. His great vision has been buried beneath the dogma of the ecclesiarchy, the greed of the high lords, the unchecked brutality of the Inquisition. And across the stars, it crumbles. For 10,000 years the Imperium has fought to survive, bleeding itself dry to maintain what little remains. Worlds burn, fleets are lost, war is endless. The dream of unity has long since given way to desperation. But in the dark places of the galaxy, in the void beyond the reach of the Imperium's light, there are those who remember a time before. There are those who were erased, but not destroyed. The lost Primarchs, if they still exist, have watched as the Imperium has withered. They have seen it become something their father never intended, something their brothers never foresaw. They have seen the corruption, the stagnation, the slow, inevitable death of the empire they once fought to build. If they return, it will not be as lost sons seeking reconciliation. They will return as something else entirely. To the Imperium they would be anathema, a force beyond its control, beyond its understanding. They would not be bound by the decrees of the High Lords, nor the faith of the ecclesiarchy, nor the decrepit laws of a dying empire. They would not kneel before the empty throne. Some would call them saviors. Some would call them vengeance. Their legions were broken, but if even a fraction of their warriors still exist, they would be something the Imperium has not seen in 10,000 years. Unshackled Astartes, no oaths to the Codex, no loyalty to Terra, no blind devotion to a faith that has consumed the Imperium's soul. They would come with purpose, with their own vision of what humanity was meant to be. And that vision would not align with the one the Imperium has clung to for so long. For those who rule the Imperium, their return would be a cataclysm. For the enemies of mankind, it would be a reckoning. The galaxy stands at the edge of collapse. The Imperium is stretched thin, waging wars on every front, losing ground with every passing century. Chaos grows stronger. Xenos empires rise from the ruins of human dominion. The Tyranids devour the void. The Necrons awaken. The old balance no longer holds. It is within this decay that the lost Primarchs, if they remain, would find their moment. They were erased from history, but history is not yet finished. The Imperium has forgotten them, but they have not forgotten the Imperium. And as the galaxy burns, as the echoes of war grow louder, as the final age of mankind looms on the horizon, one truth remains. The lost are never truly lost. They are only waiting. The Emperor did not act on impulse. Every decision, every sacrifice, every war fought in his name was part of a vast, unknowable design, a plan woven through the very fabric of time. The Great Crusade was not merely a campaign of conquest, but a shaping of the future, a forging of mankind's destiny. Nothing was without purpose. The Primarchs were not accidents of science. They were crafted, sculpted by the Emperor's own hand, each a reflection of his will, each a tool meant to serve a greater function. None of them were created lightly. And yet, two of them, two irreplaceable keystones in his grand design, were struck from history, erased with a finality that even treachery had not warranted. But the Emperor did not waste. He did not discard without reason. The removal of his lost sons was not an act of wrath, nor punishment. It was something else. Perhaps it was not destruction, but preservation. Perhaps they were never meant to be lost at all. There are those who believe that the 2nd and 11th were not erased because they had failed, but because they were too important to remain. That the Emperor, in his infinite foresight, saw something none of his other sons could comprehend. That he knew, even as the Great Crusade pressed outward, that a time would come when the Imperium would teeter on the precipice of annihilation. That in the hour of mankind's greatest need, something greater would be required. A final gambit. Some remnants of knowledge suggest that the lost sons were not removed from the Imperium, but from the Imperium's sight. That they were hidden, placed beyond the reach of history, their legions sealed away in a vault of time, in a prison of exile, where the corruption of the Imperium, the wars, the betrayals, the slow, grinding decay would not reach them. There are worlds in the deepest void, nameless and forgotten, where the ruins of fortresses stand, their walls marked by symbols that do not belong to any known legion. There are records within the Mechanicus of great constructions whose purpose was never recorded, vast stations built for an unknown purpose and then abandoned without explanation. There are whispers among the Inquisition of a lost fleet, a fleet that left the Sol system under the Emperor's command, and was never seen again. The lost sons were not discarded, they were set aside. And if this is true, then their absence is not a tragedy, nor an error. It is the key to something yet to come. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has struggled, bled, survived. But survival is not victory. The Imperium is dying, its foundations built upon endless war, its people shackled to a rotting corpse that can no longer guide them. If the Emperor foresaw this fate, then perhaps he made preparations. Perhaps he did not intend to sit upon the golden throne forever. Perhaps the lost sons were his failsafe, the contingency he built when he saw that his Imperium would not become the perfect empire he had envisioned. If he knew the galaxy would fall into ruin, if he knew that his empire would stagnate, then he would have ensured that something remained beyond its reach, something pure, something waiting. And now, as the Imperium falters, as its enemies press upon it from all sides, as the embers of its dying age flicker in the vastness of the void, that something may be stirring. Their names were erased, but their purpose was not. The lost sons are gone, but they are not forgotten. They were never forgotten. And if the Emperor's last gambit has yet to be played, then the galaxy has not yet seen its final war. The lost sons may yet return, not as relics of the past, but as the harbingers of what is to come. The Emperor's plan has always been in motion, and it is not yet finished. Time is not a river. It does not flow in one direction, does not move from past to future in an unbroken line. Time is a spiral, an echo that resounds across eternity, a cycle that repeats itself, fracturing into new possibilities even as it follows paths already walked. The Imperium does not see this. It does not understand the shape of its own history, the currents pulling it toward the same fate again and again. But there are those who do. Deep within the Webway, where no human should tread, the Black Library holds knowledge so vast, so dangerous, that even the Eldar fear to speak of it. Its halls contain the oldest records of the Imperium, of the rise and fall of empires, of the creeping madness that lurks beneath reality. It is said that among its forbidden tomes there are whispers of the lost sons, traces of an event so terrible that even the Xenos do not name it. Not a war, not a rebellion, but something worse. The Eldar Farseers have seen the echoes of this past in their runes, in the endless possibilities they cast before them. They do not speak of the 2nd and 11th, for they do not know their names, but they see the hole left behind, a wound in history that should not exist. They have sought its meaning, only to find that the threads of fate unravel when they draw too close, dissolving into paradox and uncertainty. Something happened that should never have been, something so monumental that its consequences still ripple through time. And it is not yet over. There are prophecies locked within the library that speak of a cycle yet to end. A war begun in the past, carried into the present, waiting for its final act. A prophecy that does not name the Emperor, but describes a being like him, a force that was meant to end the long war, to break the hold of chaos forever. But something interfered. Something fractured the cycle before it could complete, leaving the galaxy locked in stagnation, trapped in an age that was never meant to be. The navigators of the great void ships, those cursed with the third sight, have seen glimpses of this future. In their dreams, in the depths of warp travel where the Astronomicon dims, There are visions that do not belong to the present. They see golden warriors standing upon the ruins of terror. They see war beyond reckoning. They see shadows moving in the darkness, unseen but ever present. Some wake screaming, their minds shattered by what they have witnessed. Others never wake at all. The most gifted among them, those whose bloodlines stretch back to the days before the Imperium, have whispered of two figures, blurred and distant, standing upon the precipice of time itself. They are not the Emperor. They are not his sons as they are remembered. They are something else, something that has not yet returned. In the hidden vaults of the Inquisition, there are reports of strange occurrences, fluctuations in the warp, signals from deep space that do not match any known Imperial frequency, disturbances that resemble voices, speaking in dialects that should not exist. Some have dismissed them as echoes of lost colonies, rogue transmissions from forgotten human worlds. But others, those who understand the nature of the warp, know better. These are not echoes of the past. They are shadows of the future. The Adeptus Mechanicus, for all their devotion to logic, have recorded anomalies that defy their understanding. Machines that should be dead suddenly awakening. Calculations producing results that do not align with known physics. Patterns emerging from the void, as if something is reaching back through time itself, aligning the pieces of a puzzle yet to be completed. The great cycle moves, and the galaxy moves with it. The Horus Heresy was not the first great war of mankind, nor will it be the last. The rise of chaos was not a singular event, but part of something far older, something that has played out across the ages, each time with new names, new faces, but the same conflict. The struggle for the soul of humanity did not begin with the Emperor, and it will not end with him. If he foresaw this, if he understood the nature of what was coming, then perhaps his plans were not merely for the Imperium. Perhaps he looked beyond the Great Crusade, beyond the heresy, beyond even the present age of war, and saw the battle that had yet to be fought. Perhaps the erasure of his lost sons was not an ending, but a beginning. If they still exist, then they are part of something greater than the Imperium, greater than the Emperor's vision, greater than even the cycle that binds the galaxy. They were removed, not to be forgotten, but to be placed where they were most needed. The Imperium does not see the pattern. It clings to the past, drowning in its own decay. But there are those who watch, those who wait, those who remember. And when the final battle comes, when the cycle reaches its breaking point, when the Imperium at last faces its reckoning, the lost sons will stand upon the edge of time, not as memories, not as ghosts, but as the last pieces of the Emperor's great design, a design that has yet to be completed, a prophecy yet to come. The lost Primarchs remain an enigma, their absence a wound that has never fully healed. Their names have been erased, their deeds struck from history, their existence denied by those who claim to hold the truth. And yet, for all the Imperium's efforts to forget, they are not forgotten. Their silence lingers, an echo reverberating through the corridors of time. The Great Crusade was a march toward unity, a grand vision meant to bring humanity into a golden age. But that vision was shattered long before the Horus Heresy, when two of the Emperor's own sons were removed, their legions unmade, their presence buried beneath layers of secrecy and fear. The Imperium does not remember them, but it feels their absence. There are records, fragmented, incomplete, hinting at wars fought by warriors whose names have since been erased. There are ruins on distant worlds, fortresses and monuments that bear no allegiance to any of the known legions. There are ancient battlefields where the remains of giants lie, clad in armor that does not match the colors of the surviving Primarchs. The evidence of their existence has not been entirely destroyed. But the truth is lost. Among the oldest of the Astartes, there are some who remember glimpses of a past that no longer exists. Among the Inquisition, there are those who have read files that should not exist. Among the astropaths, there are those who have heard whispers in the warp, whispers from something that should not be. The theories are endless. Some say the lost sons turned against the Emperor before the Great Crusade had even finished, that they strayed too far from his vision and were cast down as a warning. Others claim they did not fail the Imperium, but were sacrificed for its future, removed not out of punishment, but necessity. There are those who whisper that they still exist, hidden beyond the reach of history, waiting for the moment when they will be called upon once more. The Imperium stands upon the edge of ruin. For 10,000 years it has fought to survive, waging war against itself as much as against the enemies that surround it. The dream of unity has long since faded, replaced with stagnation, corruption, and an unending thirst for blood. The Emperor remains entombed upon his throne, his mind fragmented, his empire crumbling beneath the weight of its own failures. Had the lost sons remained, could things have been different? Had their legions stood alongside Guilliman, Dawn and Russ, would the Imperium have been stronger? Or was their removal the only way for the Emperor's plan to succeed? These are questions that will never be answered, theories that will never be proven. The Imperium does not seek the truth. It fears it. And yet their absence has never been more profound. The galaxy is falling apart. The Imperium is stretched thin, its forces battered, its leaders locked in a struggle they cannot win. Chaos rises, the Xenos empires grow bolder, and the future of humanity has never been so uncertain. The Emperor's dream has been reduced to ruins, and those who rule in his name fight not to expand his vision, but to keep the Imperium from dying altogether. Perhaps the lost sons were never meant to return. Perhaps their story ended the moment they were erased. Or perhaps they remain, waiting in the darkness, unseen, but never truly gone. The lost Primarchs are a question without answer, a mystery without end, and perhaps that is how it was always meant to be.